Hello again, everyone. Welcome back for more Chaos by Tom O'Neill. We're still in chapter 8. This is going to be the second part. Hope everyone's doing great, staying cool, hydrated, all that good stuff. All right, guys. The next little piece is called Improper and Unethical, which could describe a lot of stuff we've already heard, right? Improper and unethical. Okay. In addition to his much vaunted client control, the replacement lawyer, Richard Caballero, had another quality that endeared him to the DA's office. He'd worked there himself for 8 years, so these are probably his friends. As a prosecutor, Caballero had won 5 death penalty convictions, and he was still close with his former colleagues. Bugliosi, Compton, and the others could trust him. Now all he had to do was get Atkins to take the deal. She didn't have to stay under his thumb forever, just long enough to make it through the grand jury and bring on the indictments they needed. So they really are being strategic here. We'll never know exactly what Caballero promised Atkins or how he laid out the terms of the deal. Unlike most agreements of this nature, hers was never formalized in writing, never marked by her signature. Well, he must not have been that good, because if he didn't get the deal. Whatever he said, it was enough to satisfy the higher-ups at the LAPD and the DA's office. On December 1st, they were finally ready to tell the public. They'd solved the case of the century. That was the day Police Chief Edward Davis got his big press conference. Sturdy podium, cameras rolling, hundreds of stunned and eager reporters jostling for space. Reading from prepared remarks, Davis doled out the details sparingly. He didn't even provide Manson's name, announcing that legal restrictions prohibit the revelation of further information at this time. Pressed for more information about the suspects, he said only that they were part of a roving band of hippies that called itself the Family and were led by a man they called Jesus. Davis had to be judicious, or at least appear to be. A thorough account of the murders could taint the jury pool. The next day, however, an endless trough of specifics came flooding out, provided by 2 unassailable, on-the-record sources: Atkins' new attorney, Richard Caballero, and his law partner, Paul Caruso. Well, that's interesting. Is that its own strategy? Acting as no less than a bullhorn for the DA's office, Caballero and Caruso, the latter a well-known mob lawyer and a longtime friend of LA DA Yvel Younger, outlined what would become, in essence, the prosecution's case for murder against the Manson family. Standing on the steps of the Santa Monica courthouse, Caballero told gathered reporters that Atkins was a follower of Charles Manson and that she'd been at the scene of the Tate slayings, the Hinman murder, and the killings of the LaBiancas. Atkins was under Manson's hypnotic spell, but she had nothing to do with the murders, seemingly his only effort at exonerating her amid the onslaught of grim particulars. He added that Manson called himself both God and the devil, and that the police had told him that Atkins and the others were directed by Manson to go to both the Hinman house and the Tate house. Atkins would tell her complete story to the grand jury later that week. In Helter Skelter, Bugliosi claimed that he'd come across Caballero's comments in the evening paper, and that was the only way his office learned that Atkins had accepted their deal. Somehow I doubt that. He never even tried to explain why it wasn't in writing or why Caballero wouldn't have alerted him more formally. Well, there's a lot of sus things about Bugliosi. The more that I've seen a lot of interviews of Tom O'Neill about Bugliosi, he was not a very good guy. So who knows why he did the things he did or said the things he said. Over the next few days, Caballero and Caruso kept talking to the press, and talking and talking. That does seem strange for the attorneys. I mean, usually they're working on their case and not out there chit-chatting with the press. In case there was lingering ambiguity, they described Manson's dictatorial methods. They offered a timeline of events for the nights of the murders, including the order of the deaths. They tossed in sordid details describing the killer's dress code and noting that after killing the LaBiancas, they'd help themselves to snacks from the icebox. It was a 4-day fusillade of specificity. Finally, on December 4th, the president of the LA County Bar had had enough. Well, it's good somebody's going to call them out on their antics finally, after 4 days. Bar chief scores Atkins' attorney over Tate comments. Read the Santa Monica Evening Outlook's front page, quoting him as he accused Caballero and Caruso of entirely improper and unethical conduct by revealing vital facts about the Sharon Tate murder case from the viewpoint of Miss Atkins. But the scrutiny didn't last. Amid the swell of coverage on the murders, no one seemed to mind the lawyers leaking. In a passing remark to the LA Times on the day before Atkins' grand jury testimony, Caballero more or less admitted that he wasn't acting in his client's best interest, saying he was gambling that her voluntary testimony might save her from the gas chamber. Gambling and might being the operative words. Bugliosi and his team had essentially arranged for the defense lawyers to taint the jury on the prosecution's behalf. That's interesting. Everyone in Los Angeles was suddenly an expert on the Manson family. Yeah, that's the thing. If they're doing this, how are they going to find a jury? I've been to jury duty a handful of times, and they always, they want to know if you've heard about the cases. They want to know if people know stuff, because if you already have an idea in your mind of what happened, you go into it biased. That's not good, right? Which I wonder, with all the true crime stuff out there, how that affects juries. I haven't been in jury duty in a while. I am such a nerd. I secretly want to be on jury duty. Well, not so secretly. I definitely want to be on jury duty. My husband does not enjoy it, and he gets called much more frequently. I haven't been called in a long time. Maybe if I say that, it'll jinx it into happening. But since I want it to be, maybe it won't be. I don't know. Rambling again, guys, rambling. Meanwhile, on December 4th, as they continued their press tour, Caballero and Caruso met with the DAs to finalize their deal. Bugliosi described it as excellent, yet still not in writing. It was, in fact, non-existent. As all the parties present would later admit during the death penalty phase of the trial, nothing was ever formalized or signed. The next day, Atkins testified before the grand jury, as promised. The papers reported that Manson, Atkins, Linda Kasabian, Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten, and Tex Watson had been indicted on 7 counts of murder after only 20 minutes of deliberation. Soon after, Caballero and Caruso walked away from the case, richer and more famous. I guess they did their little part and they got to, sail off into the sunset with no apparent regrets. A reporter asked Bugliosi if he would have gotten the indictments without Atkins' cooperation. He answered, "Do the French drink wine?" So wait, a reporter asked him if he would have gotten it without her cooperation. And he said, "Do the French drink wine?" which means yes. But I don't think he would have gotten the indictments without her cooperation. That's weird. Am I reading that wrong? You guys tell me what you think. All right, next section is called the shape-shifting deal, which sounds to me like more shenanigans. Of many. When Bugliosi made his deal with Caballero, he knew full well that Atkins was an unstable witness and a murderer. He needed her to get indictments for the other members of the family, but he also needed a pretext to back away from her after she'd served her purpose. It wouldn't look good if he could only score convictions by easing up on one of the killers. His reversal would be a lot easier since the deal wasn't on paper. But even so, he'd have to provide some explanation if and when the prosecution parted ways with her. Before Bugliosi put Atkins in front of the grand jury, he approved an odd request from her lawyers to have her removed from jail and brought to their offices in Beverly Hills for a taped interview. That does seem strange. In Helter Skelter, calling the arraignment unusual, but not unprecedented, Bugliosi claimed that his team went along with it because they thought Atkins would speak more freely away from her fellow inmates. Well, her inmates were the ones who she told the story to, so that's kind of a weird argument. But it also set up a chain of events that allowed the prosecutor to rid himself of her. In the comfort of Caballero's office, Atkins spoke on tape for 2.5 hours about her role in the murders. Listening the next day, Bugliosi noticed that she'd changed her story. At first, she told her cellmates that she'd stabbed Sharon Tate. Now she claimed she couldn't bring herself to do it, and instead held Tate by the arms while Watson stabbed her. That's what she told the grand jury too, that she didn't kill Sharon Tate, but the discrepancy wasn't a problem for Bugliosi as long as he got his indictments. Throughout Helter Skelter, Bugliosi inadvertently proved how malleable the Atkins deal was, describing it in different terms at different times. Early in the narrative, he said that all she had to do was testify truthfully to the grand jury and cooperate with authorities. She'd never have to testify against her co-defendants at the actual trial. In exchange, the prosecution would consider not asking for the death penalty. Would consider. Again, why weren't her lawyers like, wait a second, no, I want this in writing? But after the grand jury, the deal changed. Suddenly, she did have to testify against the others. Without her, we still didn't have a case, Bugliosi wrote. Well, I guess if they were chummy with her attorney and he wanted the same thing and didn't plan on sticking with her, then that makes a lot more sense. Like, he didn't care, obviously. He just wanted to get in there, do his part, and get out, it sounds like. Just pretty shady if you ask me. Without her, we still didn't have a case, Bugliosi wrote. Later still, he said that the prosecution was stuck with Atkins on the stand because of the deal, bemoaning the fact that he'd made an agreement with a killer. I tend to think this is all rhetorical hand-wringing, a way of upping the stakes in his book, when really he knew that Atkins was never going to take the stand. Caballero, in fact, was doing everything in his power to lead his client away from testifying. Well, yeah, you don't see a lot of defendants put on the stand in a case like this because they can mess up, the story for themselves, which is their right. But if you've ever seen her in an interview, she's a few fries short of a Happy Meal, in my opinion. And if you saw any footage of that circus of a trial, you would see that, some of the other girls got thrown out of the courtroom on multiple occasions for their odd behavior. I mean, they'd speak in Latin, they'd start singing, they just did some weird stuff. He allowed Atkins to take visits from her former friends in the family who came bearing messages from Manson. The lawyer knew full well that given enough exposure to her former lifestyle, Atkins was likely to return to Manson's fold and refute her grand jury testimony, which is exactly what she did. It worked. One day she called Caballero and told him that she refused to testify at the trial. It was her first step toward formally undoing everything, except the indictments, which couldn't be undone. So that was their strategy all along. And, I guess you got to hand it to them. It's clever. They got what they wanted out of it. Bugliosi fretted that he'd lost his star witness. But inwardly, he must have been pleased. Although he omitted it from his book, he was already in negotiations with the attorney of Linda Kasabian, a far more sympathetic witness, to cut a deal to take Atkins' place at the trial. Of course, had Atkins' attorneys been independently appointed, they would have reminded the prosecution of the terms of her deal. That apparently was non-existent and not in writing, which precluded her testimony at the trial. Now Bugliosi could claim that she'd violated the deal. Now, how could he do that if the deal was not anywhere written down? That's what I want to know. Atkins kept unraveling. On March 5th, 1970, in the attorney's room at the Central County Jail, Caballero presided over an hour-long reunion between his client and Manson. He described it as joyous, adding that Atkins and Manson both burst into laughter when their eyes met for the first time in 5 months. That is just so bizarre. They're such bizarre people. The meeting was only possible because Judge William Keene had granted Manson the right to represent himself, an allowance that shocked the courtroom. As his own attorney, Manson was entitled to meet with his jailed co-defendants on the pretext of interviewing them as possible witnesses in the case against him. Among his first requested interviews was the woman responsible for his indictment, Susan Atkins. So you would think if she was responsible for his indictment, he wouldn't be laughing and joyous when he saw her. He would be furious, I would think. After their meeting, a reporter asked Atkins if Manson had ordered her to change the story she related to the grand jury. Atkins responded just as Caballero and the prosecution always knew she would. Charlie doesn't give orders. Charlie doesn't command. Contradicting the thrust of her grand jury testimony, of course. The day after the meeting, Atkins fired Caballero and Caruso. She announced that she was recanting her grand jury testimony and formally declined to testify for the state. The same day, Judge Keene revoked Manson's right to represent himself, arguing that he had filed too many outlandish and nonsensical motions. It makes you wonder if the judge was corrupt too. Like, I don't know. I know people have the right to represent themselves, but it's like, oh, now that this has happened, okay, let's take that away. Did they want it to happen? Did they want him to sway whatever she was saying or doing? I don't know. It's possible. Caballero later testified that after he was fired, he didn't check in with the prosecution about the status of the Atkins deal. But in an interview with the Hollywood Citizen News, several weeks after his firing, he made the status of the deal crystal clear. It didn't exist. It never existed. Susan Atkins' former attorney, Richard Caballero, said that no deal had been made which caused her to testify before the grand jury, the paper reported. So basically they tricked her. That's all there is to it. They tricked her. Which lawyers do trick people, so I guess that's just one of the little tools in their bag of tricks. The excellent deal that Bugliosi had written up was no deal at all. It was excellent for him, so maybe he wasn't technically lying. It was excellent for him. Its non-existence had gone unnoticed all these years. Who cares about the legal vagaries of a confessed killer like Susan Atkins? But without this hoax of a deal and the lawyer swap that enabled it, Manson and his followers may never have been indicted, and the reigning narrative of Manson as an all-controlling cult leader may never have come out. Gary Fleischman, Linda Kasabian's attorney, he now goes by Gary Fields. That's odd. I wonder why. Told me that he was convinced the DA was instrumental in getting Dick Caballero appointed, and that Bugliosi never had any intention of keeping his deal with Atkins. Which the only way you could not keep your deal is if it wasn't in writing and you tricked the person. They used her to get an indictment, he said, and then they dumped her because they couldn't use her at trial because she was dirty. The whole thing smelled to high heaven, he continued. Caballero and Caruso got away with effing murder. They sold her down the river. It was a stunning assessment from Fields. No one had benefited more from Caballero and Caruso's dirty dealings than his client. Shady. Despicable. Absolutely despicable. All right, the next section is called Ice Cream for Atkins. Caballero had another coup during his tenure as Atkins' lawyer. He made sure that her story was heard all around the world. The world was paying attention to this. In all its gory, self-incriminating detail. Now listen to this. I know, I think it was mentioned in this book, that Bugliosi had basically a writer in the courtroom at all times, so he could get his book out of the deal, which he had made a pretty penny on over the years. And so get a load of this. Like, there's so much. I guess there weren't laws against it in those times, but after this all happened, the laws changed. Kind of like when FDR served 3 terms as president, then everyone was like, nope, term limits. It's like after the fact, they're like, we're not going to let that happen again. Anyways, onward, guys, onward. A few days before Atkins' grand jury testimony, her attorneys met with a self-described Hollywood journalist and communicator named Lawrence Schiller to negotiate the publication of her first-hand account of the murders. So Bugliosi's got a writer in the courtroom, and Caballero gets this Hollywood writer to get her story down before the trial. I mean, I'm not one to defend murderers, but it's just, there's a process that's supposed to be followed, and this ain't it. Essentially, the text would be an edited transcription of the recording she made in Caballero's office with her byline slapped on it. Caballero and Caruso later claimed that they intended for the story to appear only overseas, far from the eyes of any potential jurors in LA. But such was not the case. On Sunday, December 14th, Atkins' byline landed on the front page of the LA Times. Of course it did. Her piece ran to 6,500 words, spilling across 3 full pages. The piece was an immediate sensation. Of course it was. Far and away the most robust account of the Manson murders available to the public. So basically, she didn't take the stand, but her testimony was on the front page of the LA Times prior to jury selection, prior to the trial starting. And somehow they got by with it because they didn't think it was going to be seen in America. I'm surprised they weren't disbarred, to be honest. Readers in Los Angeles, and within 24 hours, in nearly every place on the planet with the printing press, now had all the lurid details, including those that had been kept from the public by both the prosecution and the other killer's defense attorneys. The piece spiked a vulgar account of the bloodshed with hints of Atkins' naive girlishness. "My lawyer's coming soon," it ended, "and he's bringing me a dish of vanilla ice cream. Vanilla ice cream really blows my mind." So she sounds like an idiot. As Rolling Stone put it later, any doubts about Manson's power to cloud men's minds were buried that morning between Dick Tracy and one of the world's greatest real estate sections. And that, it seemed, was a real purpose of the piece, to eliminate any doubts about Manson the public might have had. In just the first column of the article, Atkins used the word instructed 5 times in reference to Manson's role in the killings. Everything she and the family did was on Manson's orders, she said. He was a criminal mastermind, a cult leader, a conspiring lunatic. The task of assembling an unbiased jury was suddenly a lot harder. If possible at all. Do you think it's possible at all? A spokesperson for the Southern California branch of the American Civil Liberties Union told Newsweek the interview makes it all but impossible for the defendants to get a fair trial in Los Angeles. Bugliosi, craving convictions and the deluge of publicity from high-profile trial, was presumably unbothered by this. But Caballero should have been bothered, even though this piece was in effect a continuation of the many detailed press conferences he'd given. He went through the motions of outrage. Claiming to be shocked and surprised, he told the press that Schiller had double-crossed him, breaking a promise that the story wouldn't appear in the United States. So he's acting shocked and surprised. He sold the story to make money when there's no... I don't believe there's a way he believed that it would stay overseas. Come on. He's a lawyer. He's intelligent. That is a very naive... No, I don't believe it. I'm not buying it. Not buying it. Although Caballero threatened lawsuits, they never materialized. Schiller later testified that he had nothing to do with planting the story. Nor did Caballero make any effort to halt the dissemination of the story, which continued apace. That's the thing. Your argument that you didn't want it out there falls pretty flat if you're not actively trying to get it out of the public view. 1 week later, Schiller released an expanded version in a quickie paperback called The Killing of Sharon Tate, exclusive story by Susan Atkins, confessed participant in the murder. That's a long title. In the acknowledgments, he thanked several attorneys involved in this case and 2 journalists, writing, "Without their help, this book could not have been produced." Of course not. They had the recording of what she said in their office. Bugliosi maintained that his office had no idea the story was coming until that fateful issue of the Times landed on his doorstep. I don't believe him either. He hadn't learned a thing about the sale of Atkins' story, he claimed in Helter Skelter, until the death penalty phase of the trial. At that point, since Atkins was eligible for the death penalty, her third new attorney, Daishin, made an attempt to save her life by arguing that Caballero had misrepresented her. He called on everyone involved in the publication of her story to explain themselves. Reading the transcript, I learned that the DA's office not only was aware of the planned publication, but may have facilitated it, you think. And of course, Helter Skelter left all this out. The key to the scheme was Lawrence Schiller, the so-called communicator who brokered the publication deal. This wasn't Schiller's first high-profile article. Among other pieces, he'd arranged to publish the deathbed confession of Lee Harvey Oswald's murderer, Jack Ruby, which that was never, I don't know, because Jack Ruby went crazy. Well, that's connected to this. You guys, there's Kennedy assassination stuff attached to this. It's not toward the end of the book, but you're going to be shocked, I promise. All right, let me move on to what this dude had his other projects. Nude photos of Marilyn Monroe and photos of the comedian Lenny Bruce lying dead on his bathroom floor. So it doesn't sound like this writer had a whole lot of scruples either. He finished the Atkins deal on December 8th when the contract was signed, just in the nick of time. 2 days later, Judge Keene issued a gag order, making it illegal for anyone involved to talk to the press. A little late there, buddy. That should have brought a decisive end to the publication. But in violation of the gag order, Caballero drove Jerry Cohen, an LA Times reporter and a friend of Schiller, to interview his client in jail. What the actual heck? Cohen had been tapped to ghostwrite the piece. His main source was a taped account that Atkins had made in Caballero's office. But apparently he needed more material, and the lawyer was happy to accommodate him. What a crooked guy. In the car that evening, beside Caballero and Cohen, were Schiller and a stenographer, Carmela Ambrosini. At the jail, Cohen and Ambrosini went inside to interview Atkins. The purpose of the visit, as recorded in the visitor's log at Sybil Brand, was to discuss a future psychiatric evaluation. So they lied to get these writers into the jail. I'm surprised they all didn't get charged with something. Surely there's something they could have been charged with for this. Remember, Caballero had earlier claimed that Atkins could speak safely only at his Beverly Hills offices. Now, a journalist and a stenographer were talking with her right there in jail. They spoke for about an hour. When they got back in their car, Caballero made an unusual demand of Ambrosini. He told the stenographer to pull out a small section of the tape from her machine, maybe about 3 minutes worth, and give it to him. Caballero ripped the tape into tiny pieces, Ambrosini later testified, and then threw them on the floor of the car. Okay, so she's testifying to that, then maybe they were charged with something. Because who's she testifying to, and what's the situation there? Then he picked them up from the floor and put them into his pocket. I would just throw them on the floor and then be like, oh, never mind, I better pick those up and put them in my pocket. So weird. On the stand, Caballero finally admitted that the taped section contained comments from Atkins suggesting that she lied to the grand jury at his direction. So basically, he lets in these reporters, he lets them write it down, and he snips out the incriminating aspects of it. What a shyster. So at least, yeah, he was on the stand and he admitted that the section contained comments suggesting that so maybe we'll find out that why or what the particulars were to that. I'm not sure. She said something to the effect of, okay, I played your game, I testified, I said what you wanted me to say, I don't want to do it anymore. At which point he told her to stop talking. Under more persistent questioning, Caballero conceded that Atkins used the word lie and appeared to be repudiating her grand jury testimony. So basically she said, okay, I did what you told me, I lied, and he edited it all out. It was the closest thing to an admission that Caballero had manipulated Atkins, that her testimony and all the indictments that stemmed from it were unreliable. Didn't matter because they got the indictments. But again, because Atkins was a confessed murderer, this hardly seemed remarkable to the media. And of course, the story of how Caballero and Caruso became Atkins' attorney was locked in police vaults until I found it. So if Tom O'Neill hadn't gotten access to that dusty old garage type place that he was let in once and then not again, we may never know this. We wouldn't know this. Why would we? How would we? Why would we? All right, the next section is called Something Very Smelly. Jerry Cohen was a ghostwriter in the purest sense of the word. No one was supposed to know that he'd finessed Atkins' words, let alone that he'd interviewed her in jail. To that end, Lawrence Schiller had presented himself unambiguously as Atkins' interlocutor. I will be the first and last newsman with whom Susan Atkins can speak freely until her fate is decided, he wrote in the paperback version of the Atkins story. In fact, Schiller had been sitting outside in the car while Cohen talked to Atkins in jail. After that interview, Cohen ripped through his ghostwriting in 2 days at Schiller's house. So he wrote this book in 2 days. It's pretty impressive, actually. Schiller made 3 carbon copies of the finished piece, one for Caballero, one for a German editor who'd bought the translation rights, and one to be flown overseas to the London News of the World, which had paid $40,000 for exclusive English rights. I don't know what that is in today's money, but it's a decent chunk of change. Or so said Bugliosi, who wrote in Helter Skelter. How the LA Times obtained the story remains unknown. Well, a lot of shady people there. I'm sure somebody would have taken, for the right price, would have sold who knows what. Bugliosi did not write that Cohen, a reporter for the Times, was also a friend and collaborator of his. That relationship came out only when Bugliosi himself appeared as a witness during the trial's penalty phase. Under cross-examination, he admitted that he'd known Cohen for the last 2 or 3 years. As he later confirmed to me, he was collaborating with Cohen on a book of his own. Not Helter Skelter, but Till Death Do Us Part, another true crime chronicle, which eventually appeared in 1978 with another co-author. So he's got his fingers in a lot of pies. The 2 men had begun work on the book before Sharon Tate was even murdered. Bugliosi set it aside when he realized that the Manson murders would be the more sensational story. So he still did it. He just put this one in, front of the line. And he made a killing on it, millions. The defense alleged that Bugliosi had helped broker the publication of Atkins' story. They never approved it, in part because Jerry Cohen had dodged subpoena servers and never testified. But certainly it was a point in their favor that Bugliosi had omitted his working relationship with the reporter who ghost wrote the story, and that said reporter worked for the same newspaper where the story eventually appeared. Yeah, circumstantial, yeah, but it looks like a duck and walks like a duck. It's probably a duck. As for Schiller, in his turn on the stand, he did finally admit that he never met Susan Atkins. But afterward, he claimed in interviews with Vanity Fair, Playboy, and the New York Times, and even in his Pulitzer Prize-winning collaboration with Norman Mailer, the Executioner's Song, that he'd interviewed Atkins in her cell. So he said that on the stand, so he lied on the stand. That's certainly a crime. But who knows when he won the Pulitzer Prize? It was probably much later. Liars. They're all just a bunch of liars. All right, Cohen's ghostwriting would have remained a secret if not for Pete Miller, an investigative reporter for Los Angeles' KTTV. Oh wait, in January 1970. That's not so much later. As preliminary hearings continued in the Manson case, he decided to look into the Atkins sale. He wanted to see if Lawrence Schiller had actually interviewed Atkins in her jail cell, as he claimed he had. Miller checked the jail's visitor log and saw that Schiller had never been in to see Atkins. Okay, so it's going back and forth here. But he did notice a name he recognized, Jerry Cohen's, appearing alongside Caballero's. Okay, so he didn't lie on the stand, but he lied later. Either way, he got the information from Cohen. Okay, in case he wanted to prepare psychiatric defense for Atkins. Oh, please. He brought Cohen, who's a writer, in case he wanted to prepare a psychiatric defense. That's a bad lie. That's a stupid lie. Miller pointed out that Cohen was a reporter, not a psychiatrist, and Caballero abruptly ended the conversation. Somebody at least tried to call him out. Miller tried to bring this to light, but he couldn't get very far. After his initial reports aired in January 1970, Bugliosi requested a meeting with him. The two sat down at KTTV's headquarters along with Caballero, the second DA, Miller's bosses, and attorneys for the station. So they're basically scaring him. They're blackmailing him or something, intimidating him. That's the word I'm looking for, intimidating. If that's not intimidating, I don't know what is. Bunch of lawyers, and no. And his boss. Anyone would be intimidated in that scenario. This meeting came up during the penalty phase of the trial when the defense called Miller to testify. He tried to say what they discussed and why no more stories aired after the first one, but Bugliosi objected every step of the way. All he could get out was that they talked about some of the reports I'd been doing concerning Susan Atkins. As a result of this meeting, was something done regarding your further broadcast of this case? Asked Dacian, Atkins' attorney. Objection, cried Bugliosi, irrelevant. Sustained, responded the court. Shin tried again later. As a result of this meeting, did you further terminate? Another objection by Bugliosi. Will you complete the question, the judge asked. So the full question was, as a result of this meeting, did you further terminate the broadcast concerning this case? And Bugliosi objected again, and the judge sustained it. Out of earshot of the jury, Bugliosi told the judge, Miller's testimony has nothing to do with death as opposed to life. It is my contention that the defense attorneys are going to use this death penalty hearing as a forum to sling dirt at various people, including, of course, him. The judge said he wouldn't allow any mention of what happened at the meeting. It constituted hearsay. That's pretty convenient for Bugliosi as well. Thus, the prosecutor kept much of Miller's investigation under wraps. Most of the media covering the trial never even mentioned the Miller appearance. The LA Times omitted him entirely, focusing instead, as they always had, on the litany of bizarre behaviors from the defendants and their supporters outside the courthouse. I could see how that would happen, though, because it was such weird behavior that would eclipse a lot of the facts. Which, I know, I keep putting it up. You know that hoax theory, they talk about that. How many distractions there were and how many just weird little things happened. I hope you guys will go read it. If you might want to put your tinfoil hats on first, but I don't know. I want someone to read it and comment. Somebody go read it. It's 100 pages, but it's worth it. I guess I could read it, but no, I don't think it would stay up on YouTube. It's pretty gruesome, and there's a lot of crime scene photos. But I want someone else's opinion on it. Sounds crazy. I know it does sound crazy, but it also is kind of compelling. Anyways, marching on. Under oath, both Bugliosi and his co-prosecutor, Aaron Stovitz, denied that they knew about the sale of Atkins' story before it was published. All right. Maybe inadvertently, Richard Caballero impeached their testimony. Under questioning by the defense's Irving Kanarek, Caballero said, I did state to someone at the DA's office, I believe it was Mr. Stovitz, I may be wrong. Now, if you remember that Kanarek dude was pretty weird. We talked about him earlier on in the book. That I had entered into the arrangement for the sale of the story, and they were upset. Who's they? Kanarek asked. I believe Mr. Stovitz was there, and I'm almost positive someone else was there, but I cannot recall who. Maybe it was Reeve Whitson. Let me see. I'm getting myself confused here. Okay, so it's Caballero saying that. Kanarek's the one that's questioning him. So he said, Mr. Stovitz was there, and I'm almost positive someone else was there, but I cannot recall who. It was actually probably Bugliosi, let's be honest. Kanarek did his best to bring out the implication that this someone else was Bugliosi. Caballero, in a response worthy of the CIA, neither confirmed nor denied it. I want to know, there's a theory out there too, well, it's Tom O'Neill's theory actually, that Bugliosi was kind of compromised because he had done some shady stuff. I don't know if I mentioned this already. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but he thought his wife had cheated on him with the milkman. Seriously, that's such a cliche thing, and that their son wasn't his, and he basically tortured the milkman's family until he would admit it. And after all that, he became the lawyer on this case. So it's kind of like, well, we have this thing to hold over your head. This is Tom O'Neill's kind of theory. You have this behavior of yours to hold over your head. So you're going to do it the way we want you to do it. And I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think Bugliosi was compromised? I do. He certainly was not the straightest arrow, let's just say. After the Atkins story came out, Lawrence Schiller spoke to Newsweek, which asked how he'd been able to penetrate the security around the state's star witness, risking a mistrial by publishing her story. He answered with a grin. Let's say the prosecution didn't put up any obstacles. Okay, the prosecution was Bugliosi. So, why didn't he care? Obviously, it worked in his favor to put that out there. I was more than ready to believe him on that count, but what about the judge, William Keene? Why didn't he put up any obstacles? The worldwide publication of Atkins' story was about as blatant a violation of his gag order as one can imagine, but he never held Caballero and Caruso in contempt. In a story for the LA Free Press, Ed Sanders, who would go on to write The Family, argued that Judge Keene must have known in advance about the publication, letting it slide because he, like Bugliosi, wanted the publicity from the case. So they just want to get either money from book sales or notoriety for trying such a crazy case. The whole thing stinks. I mean, like I said, I'm not defending the indefensible here, but I do believe that justice is blind and there's a process that has to be followed. Due process, right? It's in the Constitution. We all due process. Okay, after Atkins' story is published, Linda Kasabian's attorney, Gary Fields, filed a motion to dismiss the case because of unfair pretrial publicity. Judge Keene denied the motion, despite abundant evidence of publicity. Yeah. If it was a different judge, that might have, probably wouldn't happen to begin with. But who knows, the case might have gotten thrown out altogether. That's where the story is, Field told me 30 years later. Something very smelly there. Okay, so that's the end of that section, or the second piece that we're going to do of chapter 8. But yeah, there's a lot of something smellies there. Like, again, how can so much corruption go down in one case, especially this high profile of a case? It's like the prosecution didn't object to all this being put out there. The judge objected and put a gag order, but didn't enforce it and didn't punish anyone for violating it. I mean, I don't know what the typical punishment for violating a gag order is, but there's just too many shady things. And why? And how was it allowed to happen? It's like you look at Manson. Does it just come down to corruption in the justice system of LA at that time? Because look how many times LA, because look at all the times Manson, a parolee, got let out from jail. And now that he's finally in, it's a total circus. All this lawyer swapping, and just until they get what they want. And apparently some of what they wanted was publicity, which enriched at least Bugliosi and the guys who wrote the book and sold it. It's like, can everyone just be swayed by money? I mean, I get money makes the world go round, but it's like, does anybody have any principles? I like to think that, I don't know. Like I said, maybe I am too idealistic, but I like to think there's some good good judges and attorneys out there and cops. I know there are. So it's just like, how did this happen? How did it happen? It's so many times and so egregiously. And it's, I don't know how many years later, and we're just now scratching the surface of it. It's crazy. It's crazy. What you all think about it, I want to hear your opinions. And thank you again for my loyal watchers. You know who you are. I'm going to start writing down your names and thanking you individually, because so many of you are so dang sweet, and I appreciate it so much. Karen, Nova, off the top of my head. All right, guys, I hope you're all enjoying it. Like I said, one more piece to chapter 8, and then just 9, 10, 11, 12, 4 more chapters after that, and we will be done and on to the next. And like I said before, stay cool out there, drink your water, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.